Hello everybody, my name is Brian Chambers and you are at the Chambers Project with our current exhibition called Godfathers. Godfathers is a group show with some of the most influential artists in my life and favorites of mine through the last 30 years of collecting and curating. Today we are going to start by talking about Rick Griffin. Rick Griffin is one of the most important illustrators and graphic artists ever. His value and what he's done to this art medium and the typography that he has brought forward cannot be overstated. I do not think there is anyone that's ever done it better than him. I could talk about Rick Griffin all day, but I'm going to keep it short and sweet, kind of focus on some of the historical pieces that we've got in this show. To briefly introduce Rick Griffin, he was born June 18th, 1944 in Paso Robles, a little suburb of LA. He started doing art at a very young age, and by the time he was 17, he had his first strip in Surfer magazine. A lot of his earliest work revolved around his character called Murphy, who became very iconic and synonymous with surfing culture in Southern California. By the time he was 18 and graduating high school, he had his first cover of Surfer magazine, and that was in 1962. In 1966, he began his move to Northern California, San Francisco specifically, to get involved with the acid tests, which were Ken Kesey's infamous parties where the Grateful Dead found their sound and formed their band. This is also where a lot of creative geniuses from this time really developed their chops and started doing the concert posters. Today we're going to take a look at everything on this wall, and we're going to start here with this photo, which is my personal favorite photo that I've ever seen of Rick for many reasons. One of them being he is drawing on the desk at this time what would become the album cover for the Grateful Dead's third studio album called Oxa Moxa. Also on the wall is the poster from the Hawaiian Oxa Moxa, and this photo is proof that the Hawaiian Oxa Moxa came before the Oxa Moxa. The Oxa Moxa was originally done for a 3-night run of shows at the Avalon Ballroom in January of '69, but the Grateful Dead liked the image so much they ended up using it as their album cover that came out 6 months later. Also on the wall right here, on one piece of illustration board, is the two drawings that you see behind me. We'll get to those in a minute. This can was what Rick was using to hold his pens while he was drawing the Oxo. This was given to my mentor, Curator Castor, from Rick's wife, Ida, and Curator was kind enough to pass it off to me. Okay, so chronologically looking at the work that was selected for this show, we're going to start right here, and this is a very important piece. It's known as FD89, or the Sunday Funnies in the poster collecting world. Rick did this for Quicksilver Messenger Service for a 3-night run, October 27th through the 29th, 1967. What's very interesting about this is when he did this, Robert Crumb was just about to launch Zap Comics. It was the beginning of the underground comics world. And upon seeing this work from Rick, Crumb invited Griffin into the Zap Collective. Also, what's very interesting, around this time, actually 2 weeks after the release of this poster for the shows, was the launch of Rolling Stone magazine. Rolling Stone magazine launched on November 9th, 1967, and Rick was commissioned to do the original Rolling Stone logo. So moving on from here, we are going to get to the Flying Eyeball, which is pretty much unanimously across the planet viewed as the most iconic concert poster of all time. This was the 105th show that Bill Graham produced, and this was the first time that Hendrix played in San Francisco after being the king of the musical planet 6 months before at the Monterey Pop Music Festival when he lit his guitar on fire and was the undisputed heavyweight king of rock and roll across the planet. There were originally 300 first printing posters of this before the show. They were stapled on telephone poles, taped in store windows. You know, how many of them survived is unknown, but when you find them in very good condition as a first printing poster, they can fetch enormous dollars and have broken some records, and this is a holy grail amongst the poster collecting community. Right here we got the Hawaiian Oxamoxa. As you can see, this piece clearly meant a lot to Rick. The scale alone is unlike anything I've ever seen as far as the original pen and ink work that he is most known for and that is a favorite of mine. Rick was also known for misspellings, and as you can see, he misspelled beautiful here, so he had to patch it up and spell it correctly. This was for the Grateful Dead in Honolulu in July of '68. The concerts were ultimately canceled, and the printer that printed the posters was never paid. So it's believed that there are less than 25 copies of the first printing poster known to exist, and it is certainly a white buffalo sort of scenario in the poster collecting world. Absolutely one of the most iconic posters from the era, and very rare, very beautiful. Rick at the absolute peak of his powers. This is known as the soundproof eyeball, and this was done for the Youngbloods and Screamin' Jay Hawkins at the Avalon Ballroom, February 7th of 1969. This piece has always had a lot of deep meaning for me because I've been very fortunate to work with the Griffin estate. This was the piece that I identified that would translate best into a 3D bronze form, and that's where this came from. The piece above is known as AOR 2.25 and was done for Van Morrison at the tail end of January 1969. This is also a very iconic piece, and people have spent lifetimes trying to figure out what Rick was writing and what this text meant. And it turns out it doesn't mean anything. It's just a glyph, but the lettering and the form is so unique and so iconic Griffin that it is just, it's stunning. And just the line work alone and the detail and all of this is, nobody else can do that other than Rick Griffin. This is the Man from Utopia corner. Man from Utopia was, or is, considered by many to be Rick's absolute magnum opus. It was commissioned by a man named Gary Arlington. It was published in 1972. All of the work for this book was created between 1968 and 1972 during Rick's heaviest psychedelic years, and was created purely out of self-interest. This was all the stuff that was just going through his head when he was most psychedelic, and it's a gem and the work in there. There's 28 drawings in the book. This is the cover. This is the splash page. This is the third page, and this is Kilroy, which is the second to last piece in the book. This is the Man from Utopia bronze. That was the third bronze project that I did with the estate, and it was clearly done to take the 2D image from the cover of the Man from Utopia and turn it into 3D form. From here, we're moving into some album covers. And what you see right here was the Dylan and the Dad album covers from 1988. This is the first draft, and this was the final. The differences in it is very subtle. There's a little more orange in the sun, a little more orange on the wings down here, but very minor. this is the back of the album cover. So this was the first pass, and this piece in particular is pretty special, as this was the property of Jerry Garcia, and that is Jerry's writing. Rick gave this to Jerry, and Jerry ended up giving it to his dentist. His dentist is the one that introduced the Dead with Dylan, and thus spawned this project. Shall we move into the second room?
Let's go.
All right. All right, now we are in the second room, and this room was set up as a retrospective for Jacaber Castor. Jacaber Castor is my mentor, and ran the highly influential Psychedelic Solution Gallery that we're going to get to over in the corner. But I'm going to start here by showing you Jacaber's original Psychedelic Solution logo that he hand drew himself, and he used until he licensed the Crying Eye. The Crying Eye was done in late 1968 and was originally meant to be an album cover for Mad River. The album cover never happened, and it wasn't to be. Jacaber ended up getting this drawing from a fellow named Jimbo Phillips, who is most known for the Screaming Hand from Santa Cruz Skateboards. He picked it up at a flea market in Santa Cruz in the early 70s, and Jacaber ended up getting it from him like 15 years later, and he licensed it to be his logo before I finally was able to peel it off of him 5 or 6 years ago and license it to be our logo here. On this wall, you see chronologically, this is the hog farm. This is known as AOR 2.358. This was done for Wavy Gravy and his troupe for a show in LA in November of '67. Wavy liked this piece so much, he ended up using it as the cover for the Hog Farm book that came out in 1976. When I came into possession of this piece, it was signed by Rick, but Wavy had actually never seen the original, and I was able to meet Wavy a couple of years ago and have him sign it as well, and that was really special for he and I. Above and below it, you see this is the 140th Bill Graham concert, and this was this time after the Flying Eyeball show in February of '68, when Hendrix returned to play again at Winterland for a 3-night run. This piece and the 141st Bill Graham show with Iron Butterfly and the Sir Douglas Quintet, they were collaborations that Rick Griffin and Moscoso did together on acid in 8 hours one night. The last Griffin piece that we see in this little corner was done in 1986 and was originally intended to be an album cover for the Grateful Dead. The record company ended up canning that idea because of the Confederate references and the stars and the hats, so it was a little too controversial. So it didn't end up being an album cover, but it's nonetheless a beautiful piece. We're gonna move over to the final Griffin pieces from this show. And this right here is the original artwork for Jacaber's grand opening, Halloween 1986, with none other than Rick Griffin and the Ninth Wave. This is the art, and at the opening, Rick painted on this live. They set it up as a diorama of his studio so that everyone that attended the event could be in the life of Griffin in the studio. So a lot of this was painted live, and it was all painted at the grand opening of the Psychedelic Solution. This screen print right here was done for the grand opening as well. It's known as the Surfing Skeletons, and this is a very classic California Grateful Dead, very iconic imagery, and I think that's a wrap. Like, decent?
Yeah, that's good.
All right.